Welcome back to another episode of T-10, the show with 10-minute takes on the future of education in healthcare. I'm your host, Tim Fitzpatrick. On today's episode of T-10, you'll hear from Christy Cheung, who currently leads digital innovation and transformation for Sanofi in Canada. Christy and I first met in 2018 at the Interface Health event in Vancouver, while she was still earning her PharmD from UBC. Today, Christy is combining her pharmacy background, experiences as an MSL in neurology, and passion for all things digital health. It sounds like this role also allows her to explore digital health internally and has a lot to do with her focus on stakeholder education around digital literacy. If you're interested in neurology, biomarkers, AI, or pharma, Christy is someone you should get to know and connect with. You can also check out the show notes for links to her AI Collective. It's a project she co-founded to help pharmacists understand the basics and use cases for AI across healthcare. Without further ado, please enjoy my first international episode with Christy Cheung. Christy, it's so good to finally have you on. Thank you for joining me on T-10.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So it's pretty funny to think that we met, I don't know, was that 2017? I had just started Icona stuff. You're the first person I met at the conference in Vancouver. We've
Yes.
both done quite a few new things since then. But I'm excited to have you on because we talk often, but we have not had a chance to talk here. And you've been changing roles. So I want to give you a chance to share your latest role at Sanofi and what you're working on. I know there's been a change there, but why don't you start there with kind of who you are, what you're currently working on?
Okay, thank you. So my name is Christy. I'm a pharmacist by training, and I started my career at Sanofi, and I'm still here now. So I was originally in our medical teams, both in head office and then in the field as a medical science liaison or MSL. More recently, so about 6-7 months ago, I switched into a new role, and that's leading digital innovation and transformation for our specialty care business on the Canadian side. And I imagine similar to many other innovation roles, I think the exact roles and responsibilities are still very undefined and they constantly evolve. But I think it's what's most exciting, at the same time most daunting bit about this role.
Sure. Yeah, so this is great. I know you and I have talked digital health. That's kind of how we first started chatting and just getting to know what each other was interested in. And we've collaborated separately on kind of research into what providers and different stakeholders think about digital health and what it is. And it's funny to think about, on the one hand, in the last 5 years, how much people have thought about, well, what is digital health? And now you're in a role where you're actually shaping how that part of the industry is thinking about digital health and understanding digital health. So could you maybe go a bit deeper into how your understanding the last 5 years has shaped some of what you do now, but then also, of course, what does digital mean to the organization and kind of how you're thinking about it in your position?
For sure. And I think just being an observer of the digital health ecosystem in the last 5 years, it's been such a roller coaster ride, but exciting. Like, it's gone up. Of course, there were pandemic impacts there, and it's kind of, just evolved a lot throughout the last 5 years, and how biopharma and how the industry is viewed it, I think, has been really interesting to see. I think the appetite for digital health has really increased. But I think there's still some hesitancy. So if I just backtrack a little bit, like for my role, I mentioned it's, somewhat undefined. And I think digital means so many different things to different people, especially in our industry. So on the one hand, I could be implementing, introducing, piloting new digital tools, solutions, processes, and really just acting as the change agent or change ambassador. But on the other, I think a big part of what I hope to do in this new role and what I'm really passionate about is inspiring and amplifying a culture of innovation. So this could really just mean looking for ways to celebrate, team members, pilot projects, but it could mean things like exploring digital health opportunities or any opportunity outside of the traditional biopharma world. Um, and then to your second part of the question about how industry thinks about digital health,
Mhm.
um, I think it's really interesting, and I think it depends on who you talk to. And I'll elaborate. So,
Please.
there are groups within the pharma industry who really view digital health as a supportive service to the existing brand, so a traditional drug molecule or a biologic. Um, Others might have a different way of approaching it, and they may have some more freedom and flexibility to explore digital health. They may be in a more sandboxed environment. So that's also a really neat approach, and it really just depends on the company structure or how the organization has gone about it. And there are certainly pros and cons. Ultimately, there's also a business component to it. Um, but it's interesting to really connect with different folks in the industry to see how they are thinking about digital health and what they're excited about going forward.
And this is a great segue because, well, before we get there, because I absolutely want to understand and hear where you're excited about this. Just now that you mentioned this is a relatively recent role, and I'd
Hmm.
imagine you're getting a sense of what can be accomplished in large organizations, and given all those different kind of it sounds like personality mixes, but also
Yep.
different drivers of different business units, even internally. So I want to hear where you're excited. Uh, do you get the sense that there are people who are advocates? You know, you mentioned supportive versus sandbox, and those seem like structural kind of philosophies or ethos, if you will. Are you finding there are advocates internally? You know, if your job is amplifying and finding those people and being that internal champion, and I can't say enough about the role of a champion in getting anything into an
Yeah.
organization. So I know, I'd imagine that being that internal ambassador is such an important role. Are you finding you're connecting with people and there are lots of others like you, either in your organization or across that side of the industry, who are excited about
Sure.
the role of digital and kind of the future of your space?
I think we're still getting there,
Okay.
and that's just based on my read so far, and other people might have different opinions. Um, I think what I've seen is that there are now digital health, or termed otherwise, but digital health teams across most, if not all, of the pharma companies. And each one of them have different approaches, like I mentioned before. But I think there are strong voices, but now it's about amplifying that voice and making sure we're increasing awareness, making more noise about what goes on in the digital health landscape external to our industry, and making sure that other people are well aware of what the opportunities are as well. And I think that's, an opportunity for more education, for more dialogue between the digital health community and also pharma, but also like academia and other sorts of institutions that touch healthcare.
Yeah, this is so I want to talk education for sure.
Yeah.
And you bring up a great point. And as someone who has not been on your side, certainly been in your role, doesn't have a PharmD, but I can imagine with existing business units and large organizations, uh, the shift to digital, while it might be highlighted in a role, right? Certainly like
Yeah.
transformation or lead, like
Yeah.
for a lot of people, I'd imagine it might be an easier lift for it to be just an easier way of doing existing processes at first, if it's not shaped as
Exactly.
or pitched as necessarily a giant transformation or step change, or however we
Yeah.
like to frame it as people who are building solutions in digital health. So I'm sure that's also part of your job, which is a judgment call and kind of
Yep.
seeing where are these opportunities that I can recognize and incorporate without having to call it something that's going to radically change people's workflows or the days ways of doing business. So I appreciate
Yeah.
that. And I want to hear more about education. So you just mentioned this in this comment. It's certainly obviously the topic we talk about most here. It's why we're here. How do you think about education? And please feel free to take that wherever you want, because I know you've been actively involved in this, whether it's stakeholder side or externally. But how do you think about education in your role?
Yeah, so I mentioned a few things earlier, but if I just continue on the same thread about education, maybe within my industry and within um, my organization and other companies as well, I think there needs to be more conversations again about what goes on outside of pharma. Um, I feel like the startup or smaller organization landscape, we see a lot of companies pitching to pharma companies now. I think with it on our side, we also need to do better in terms of inviting startups or inviting other groups to come in and spread awareness about all the innovation that's going on outside. Like in pharma, we do a really good job of research and development with heavy scientific rigor, and we're really good at developing great medications for folks. Um, but I think there are ways that we can add more creativity. We can rethink how we provide care for patients and truly keep our patients at the core. And sometimes that means looking at things outside of what we're used to.
Mhm.
So, really having good dialogue between pharma and the startup ecosystem. I think in one of your previous episodes, like Henry from Altoida was mentioning a lot more education about digital biomarkers in pharma. So that's just an example of having more open dialogue between the two groups or ecosystems.
So first of all, shout out Henry, love it.
Yeah.
And we'll we'll have to. We've been thinking about getting a group episode where people can share kind of
Yeah,
insights on that side, and we should think about doing that.
for sure.
Um, that's a really important point, and just quickly on things that I've seen in that the awareness and education piece, especially where you're building something potentially so novel or in a way that the industry or people you work with just haven't seen it positioned before, or they're not
Hmm.
fully aware of the opportunity because it's just either slightly adjacent to
Yeah.
or completely different from the area they're used to operating in. So I love that idea of who else outside of our organization can help us understand the opportunity here and see if there's alignment. But at the very least, you're raising your own awareness of how else you might think about it. So that's
And I
that's pretty
think
cool.
a, a big part of education is also like peer to peer education, right? And that's where having those champions can really be helpful. But the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about is in our industry, I think I'm seeing a bit more of this now, but it would be great to have more team members or talent that come from completely different backgrounds than what we're used to. So, recruiting folks coming from the tech space, the data field, that's a big one. Um, what I personally want to see more of is more like user experience and user design presence in our
Mhm.
industry. They really have a great voice and advocacy for our patients and caregivers. I was talking to a friend a couple weeks ago, and I mean, we were joking, but it's not really a joke. We were saying, like, at the leadership level, they should have chief patient officers or chief caregivers officers to make sure that their voice is really heard. I think we all have a very similar mission. Like, we ultimately want to improve how we deliver care to our patients, but I think we can do more on that front and to think more creatively about it.
I love the idea of a chief patient officer. I think there are a few maybe startup side companies who have done it. Obviously, the
Perhaps,
ones I
yeah.
think of immediately are like the work at Savvy Cooperative and Ask Patients, and just there's organizations who are doing a really incredible job of bringing in that voice. I love that idea, right? Obviously, a
Hmm.
reason I'm here, and some great news out today for those October 2022 for patient data and having access to that data and being able to tell that story. So I think this whole idea, this trend, is certainly
Yeah,
something that if we can find ways to bring that voice forward and to bring it into
definitely.
the actions of the organization, maybe we can close that gap between the decisions that are made in the echo chamber of a boardroom and what actually happens in the clinic setting. And another
Hmm.
reason why, by the way, pharmacists tend to gravitate, at least in my experience, um, towards digital health, towards building new tools, and they have that
Yeah.
really unique, and I know we have a lot of mutual friends who happen
Yep.
to be building or in this space, and they've been in those outpatient pharmacy, retail pharmacy clinics, and they're in the communities, but they also have
Mhm.
the medical knowledge. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but that is like part of where I'm seeing. It may not seem like a multidisciplinary skill set, but it certainly is from what I've seen of pharmacists who have made their mark on digital health. So I like that
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think the pharmacy profession is really um, has really picked up on the digital health piece. I think coming from a pharmacy background, we're very used to having these sorts of conversations with patients about their medications. But not only that, it's really about their journey. And sometimes really it's about the patients teach us more than we're taught in school about um, these conditions and what patients go through themselves. So I think there's a lot of education that goes back and forth, and that's what's great about this sort of relationship between healthcare professional and patients themselves, and we need more of that.
I agree. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I'm optimistic. I think that
Mm-hmm.
we're in Q4 now, and it seems like things are picking up on the funding side again, despite we're looking at the macro environment, and but still, I feel optimistic about a lot of the companies that are
Yeah.
sharing recent results and publishing papers and showing whether it's social determinants or reduced hospitalizations and
Mm-hmm.
improving care management. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to be excited, and obviously a lot
For
of pharma
sure.
news lately as well. So that kind of takes us into
Yeah.
future looking, right? I want to understand, as someone in this role at such a large organization, how are you thinking about the future in terms of what you're optimistic about, and certainly where education might play. But just in general, I'd love to hear maybe whether it's a year from now or it's more of the
Mm-hmm.
5 to 10 year aspirational tech horizon. What are you excited about seeing over the next several years?
Yeah, and I with our industry, there's such it's such a large organization that there are so many opportunities for digital health, I think. And this is really just my perspective, having been in only a few of those functional areas within pharma. Um, but you'll often hear people say like R&D is where there's a lot of digital health and or digital impact in general as it relates to clinical trials. But I think digital biomarkers, just because I'm nerdy, I feel like that's an area that I'm really excited about. And there's certainly specific therapeutic areas where I see a lot of impact, like neurology, perhaps psychiatry, but also neuromuscular diseases. So I see a lot of that, and I think it's great because we we in the healthcare community, we can always do better in terms of understanding the patient's disease state. And with leveraging digital, I think we can better understand the day to day, but also like the continuous of how what patients go through, right? As they're whether it be early in their disease or like throughout the course as they progress. So, digital biomarkers, measurement, leveraging data there, I think there's a lot of opportunity there for us to learn more from. Um, and then, kind of on the other side, so we have, medications available for patients, we have medications in development in pipeline, potentially effective and safe for patients. But beyond treating the condition, what else can we do to improve the patient's journey, right? I was saying earlier, we do a really good job of research and development for medication specifically, but there's a lot more to the patient's healthcare journey that I think we can touch. So whether it's reducing time to diagnosis or if it's other things like social, occupational health, are there other areas that we can really think of to improve patients' interactions with the healthcare system, patients' interactions with organizations, companies? Um, so figuring what the opportunities are there and exploring a bit more of that, I think is really interesting to me, and I see that um, really amplifying the offerings that we can provide our patients beyond just the medication.
We are definitely going to have a panel about digital biomarkers because there's such a nicely rounded out uh, coverage of expertise between you and Henry and a couple others who I have top of mind. So thank you for sharing, Christy.
Yeah,
Before we wrap up here,
yeah.
if people have questions, want to connect with you, want to read some of your writing, where can they find you and how can they connect?
Yeah, for sure. So you can reach out to me through LinkedIn or through AI Collective. So AI Collective is just a pet passion project that my
Mhm.
partner and really great friend Whitley and we've just built as a bit of an educational resource for healthcare professionals. We're still working on it, but you can reach out to me through there with feedback, comments, questions, concerns, or through LinkedIn anytime.
I love it. And shout out to Whitley. What you
Yep.
two have written and built at AI Collective is such a great entry and point for people to continue learning. If you are interested in AI and how AI is playing a role in healthcare, it's an amazing starting place. And again, excited. Thank you for coming on. It was so good
Thank you
talking
so
to you. And
much.
of course, hopefully we'll have you back on here soon on the panel.